So it was a snowy December night in my home city of Joplin, just about 150 miles south of where we are right now. And I got a call from a friend, and he said, you know that lady who pushes the grocery cart around the downtown area, down Main Street, the homeless lady named Mary. If you can find her tonight, I would love to keep her. My wife and I would love to have her at our house overnight tonight. And I said, well, we'll go look for her. So my wife and I got in our minivan and we began tootling down the streets of Joplin looking for Mary. Mary typically slept in trolley depots, so we were checking the trolley depots, but she wasn't there. We found her. She was down the sidewalk on Main Street underneath the awning of the public library. We pulled up. We left the minivan running as we went to approach her with this offer, because Mary was certainly off the grid and diagnosably schizophrenic, and we were just certain she would probably say no. We were surprised when she nodded in agreement to go and stay with my friend and his wife that night. And so I began to take all of the garb that was around her. All you could see was her face as we approached her, because she had so many coats and blankets and clothing just piled around her to keep her warm through the night as she was sitting there. And I began to take all of this stuff off of her and put it back into this empty grocery cart until the grocery cart was full. And then I was packing the side bags, and then unpacking the underneath side. And then finally she's free. My wife helps her up from the chair. They're walking arm in arm down the sidewalk toward the minivan. I take her little brown metal folding chair and I put it on top of the grocery cart. It won't even fit really, so I've got to hold it on there. And I realize, kind of like a guy who's just about to get checkmated in a game of chess, there's nothing I can do other than walk this grocery cart back to the mission. There goes Mary and my wife back to the minivan. And so I'm kind of clicketing down the sidewalk in the middle of the snow in my slacks and dress shoes on this particular evening, stepping through the puddles. I hop this buggy off of the curb and I'm waiting for some cars to pass by, and it was amazing how it seemed like the headlights were just staring at me as they slowly passed by. It must have taken a while for Mary and my wife to get settled in the van, because they're just now driving by. I'm like half a block away already, and I look up and there's Mary sitting in the passenger seat where I was just a few minutes ago. She waves. I'm like, hi. And I think how strange it is that we've traded places all of a sudden. How did this happen? Well, that was a 4-word question that actually summed up much of Mary's life. How did this happen? When we think of that 4-word question in relation to a person's life, we begin to think about how life can often go astray. It goes off course from maybe where things should have gone, which leads me to this first word I want to discuss with you today. And it's this word justice. I love Ken Wheatsman's definition. He says, truth pertains to what is. Justice pertains to what ought to be. What ought to be. And I'm not talking about punitive justice or procedural justice or even social justice. I'm talking about biblical, restorative justice. What ought to be. It's that many of us in this room have dedicated a great deal of our lives toward, in partnership with all of creation's groaning for the fullness of redemption. Where did all that come from? Where does all of the energy and the resource and the effort toward this come from? This thing that some of us just say is poverty alleviation or poverty relief. I'd like to suggest today that it really comes from this right here, compassion. And I want you to think of compassion not as something that you do more than something that you feel. I don't believe compassion is something that we muster up or willfully exhibit more than it is something that is imparted to us. It's conveyed to us. In fact, the Greek in the New Testament, splanknizomai, means literally seated in the gut. It's compassion that we feel when we interface that person whose what is so starkly different than what ought to be. And when we feel it, it drives us to do something. And I want to talk the rest of my time on that drive. Imagine justice as the destination. Imagine compassion as the fuel. What are we missing? We're missing a really cool little vehicle like that. I'd like to own one of those. I don't even know if that thing takes gasoline. That vehicle I call charity. And I want you to know I'm in opposition to any viewpoint that would denigrate the word charity to simply the distribution of alms or merely handouts. No, I don't think that is the case. I hope to convince you that as we reframe charity, it fits very well in continuum between what it is we feel that drives us to do something, and that something that we do can be a catalyst for justice. But not all charity leads to justice any more than all 3-point shots lead to 3 points. Sometimes our aim is off. Our charity can be effective or it can be ineffective. No matter how much fuel we put in that vehicle, it's simply not going to get us anywhere. My wife and I started this ministry 18 years ago, leasing the back end of a room in a Red Cross building. Today, this is one of 4 properties that we have in Joplin. This particular one is the Outreach Center. It is the place where we're engaging some of the most difficult situations, people who are chronically homeless, chronically and horribly addicted, people who have severe mental health issues, some people with real disabilities. From this outreach center alone, we'll meet nearly 25,000 basic needs this year through more than 700 volunteer shifts that are filled every month. We're very heavily volunteer driven because our purpose is to serve the church in its mission to help the poor. We have no interest in being a parachurch organization. I'm not even sure I understand what that is. We simply want to be a conduit for the local church to exercise effective charity. Well, inside of our outreach center is a worth shop. We call it a worth shop because we believe that work awakens worth in people's lives. So whether it's the basics of hygiene supplies or a night of shelter or even a meal ticket, people are earning things that they need every day through partnering with us in small enterprises that are running at our mission. One time I walked out of our doors and there was a couple of guys that were standing there. They were living at our shelter. They're homeless. And he said, "Hey, pastor," which I'm not a pastor, but he said, "Hey, pastor." He said, I've stayed at missions all over the nation, but I've never had to work for my bed and meals. You guys take the shame out of the game. And another one said, "Yeah, it's like we get to keep our dignity." This model of reciprocity that we call the Worth Shop began after I had a dinner with Ralph. So it's probably 10 years ago, I felt compelled to go live on the streets. Now, normal people take a thought like that and they file 13 it pretty quickly, and that's what I did as well. And then it hit me a second time. I should go live on the streets. And I said, I'm not going to do that. And then it hit me a third time, and I went and I told my wife. And gentlemen, I just want to tell you, for those of you who are married, if ever you feel compelled to go live on the streets, I want you to proceed with caution. I had no idea the response my wife was going to give me, which is, "I don't think so." She said, "In fact, I believe if you're going to go live on the streets, God's going to tell me that you're going to go live on the streets." And that very night, I'm reading a book with her together called Crazy Love by Francis Chan. Turn the page, and there he begins to talk about a guy who voluntarily went and lived on the streets. And tears began to stream down her face. She knew this was the sign. So I got up the next day, nothing but the clothes on my back, and I headed out, not really knowing how long that was going to be. This short stint of living on the streets, you learn a lot of things, but this one time with Ralph was probably the most significant. Ralph is a guy that I knew. I'd helped him many times through our ministry. But tonight, as the sun went down, we were just 2 homeless guys hanging on the street together. He had a brown bag and there was a sandwich in it, and he said, "James, would you like half the sandwich?" And I want to tell you, my first thought was, no, I'm never going to take your sandwich from you. But I was hungry. All I'd had that morning was a donut at Salvation Army. I hadn't eaten anything all day. And I went ahead and I took Ralph up on his offer. I broke bread with Ralph, and it wasn't even my bread, it was his. And I got to tell you, as that happened, something like a facade I didn't even realize was there came down, and I realized I had been viewing Ralph and so many others as simply the recipient of my benevolence. Me, the minister, and he, the ministry. I had not been viewing Ralph as someone who could help me, as someone who could bless me, and in this case, as someone who could feed me. And I think a question we should ask ourselves is, how are we viewing people? If Kenny, this is Kenny's sign, if Kenny had this sign and he's standing on the median of a street, there's a stoplight, and you pull up at the stoplight and he's standing here with this sign, and for those of you who can't quite see it, it says, "Hungry, blessed are you." What's your perception? How do you view him? What if somebody pulls up right beside you and they're in a different kind of car with a different kind of look, and he's kind of trying to get a read on him, and he flips it over. And he flips over a sign to say this instead: food stamps half price. Or maybe as you pull up, you're just that person, and he's gauging you, and he says, this person's just gushy and full of compassion and sympathy for people. And so he unfolds it like this, and he says, "Hey, I'm cold, wet, cast out. It's been 28 days. Or maybe as you pull up, he says, "Boy, there's the business person right there. They just want the facts." And so he just flips it open like this, and he says, "Listen, I'm traveling, okay? I've lost my ID. I need some help. God bless." Now, I don't know how you were viewing Kenny at the very beginning of this small illustration, but after considering that on a 12-inch by 12-inch piece of cardboard, he's crafted 4 different message types, I would suggest maybe we ought to view Kenny a little bit differently. You see, that's what we've got to do. We've got to see every single person, not for their incapacity or disability or what they can't do, but to be able to see their capacity and their potential and their ability first and foremost. That is the work of our True Charity initiative. Through public service announcements and online learning and regular educational events and even billboards, we're teaching our entire city a new way to engage the Kennys and the Ralphs and the Marys in our city effectively. My dream for the True Charity initiative is that it might play some small part in helping us shift as a nation back toward neighbor helping neighbor before the state helps our neighbor. And I want to tell you, 18 years of doing this, I have seen our public charity system often do more harm than it does good. It harmed Seth. He was a 19-year-old guy. I was having lunch with him in our dining mission area, and I said, "How did this happen?" I asked him the question. He said, "Well, I was living with my grandmother and my mother, but someone at an agency told me that if I was homeless, I'd qualify for HUD's rapid rehousing." It harmed Rick, who was a chronic alcoholic, 29 years old, been on the streets for a long time, raised by a mother who was a drug addict. I'm having regular sessions and lunches with him, just getting to know him. He misses one. I see him at the next one. I said, "Where were you?" He said, "Well, I was in jail." I said, "Okay, and public drunkenness?" He said, "Yes." I said, "How did that happen? You don't even have a job, Rick. Where do you get the money for that?" He said, "Well, on this particular occasion, I sold my government-subsidized cell phone, which they're going for $50 on the street." When I think about guys like Seth and guys like Rick, I kind of want to yell, how did this happen? Maybe you do too, as you look at the landscape of poverty in your own community or across our nation. How did this happen? But let's remember, it was Mary's forward question in the beginning. How did this happen? And I can tell you, for Mary, government is not going to ever generate any solution that's going to restore joy to her soul. There's no expert that's going to engineer any answer that's going to renew her spirit. But I do believe that true charity can. Because real charity stems from God's heart of compassion for a broken man. And it compels us to extend our lives to people who really need life. And as we reframe charity like that, I believe it'll put us on a path toward a destination of life being much more what it ought to be. Thank you.